Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Transforming Autism Project webinar. Today, our topic is strengthening communication and language development. My name is Kendall Cygan, and I'm here with my co-partner, Andrew. And Andrew and I today will take you through this PowerPoint. And now Andrew will introduce himself, and we will get started.
Thank you, Kendall. So, excuse me, it's morning for me here in the USA. I'm coming to the webinar from the west coast of the USA, from San Francisco. So I have my morning voice, and most of you have your evening voices. So I am Andrew Shahan, and I've been working with children with autism and families for since the 1980s. So what I am excited about is Kendall and I, of course, our whole focus here, excuse me, is to put our brains together, our experience together, and really give you, as parents and families, some practical information and tools that you can use to really strengthen your children's, especially communication and social development. Kendall and I have learned a lot about this over the years. We're still learning, of course, but one of the things that we want to always say to all of you as parents is that no one, we always like to start with this, no one really is going to have a bigger impact on your child's development than you and your family. As professionals, and Kendall and I are both professionals in this field, sometimes the professional community with good intentions has given you the message that we are the experts and we know everything and we will kind of show you, teach you, support your children, in many ways educate or treat your children so that they have a better life. All of that is true, that we're certainly here to help, but what we've learned over the years, and I think what we want to really affirm for all of you, is that you are absolutely the most important people in your child's life, and you will have the biggest, longest lasting impact on your child's development, in addition to whatever professional support you have. So that said, that's why we're going to focus on you. Okay, so I'd like to go to the first slide if I can. We're collaborating deeply today as a team here. I'm not activating the PowerPoint, but I have the Wizard of Oz behind the scenes who's doing this. And so if we can go to the next slide, hopefully that will work. Let's see. Yes, look at that. So this is what I just said. I don't need to reiterate it. Oh, sorry. This is slightly different. What I will just add to what I already said is that where your child is going to learn the most about communication is through their everyday interactions with all of you. Therapies can be helpful, speech and language therapists and behavior therapists. And sorry?
Videos could be helpful, but everyday interactions are the most important.
Exactly. So there's nothing more important than your everyday interactions with your child, and that's actually where children learn the essence and the foundation of communication development. Again, although therapy or education can be helpful, communication is learned in day-to-day interactions with people, period. So that's really important for all of you as families to recognize. Okay, so going on to the next slide, please. This is a really cool slide that Susanna, our other TAP therapist, put together, which really captures the essence of what we want to try to convey to all of you today. What we are trying to do with all of our children for whom communication and interaction with people is difficult because their brains are wired differently. This is the kind of environment we want to create with all of our children in our everyday interactions with them. As we do what's in the center circle here, when we are able to observe and listen to and follow our children's initiatives, right? Meaning what they are thinking about, interested in, focused on, what's most important to them in any given moment. When we do that, we give our children a very important and very powerful message, which is that I matter, right? Child receives the message, I see, I matter, I'm important to mommy and daddy. What I'm thinking about, what I'm interested in, what I'm feeling matters. And what I want to do, therefore, is communicate more with my parents, with whoever is with me that's affirming what I'm interested in or focused on. And that is such a critical foundation for all subsequent communication and language development. If our children don't get that message, and because, again, their brains are wired differently, receiving that message can be more challenging for them. If they don't get that message, and they don't receive from all of us that way of interacting, which is, you matter to me and I want to listen to you, what happens is our children can not necessarily recognize social interaction as positive and fun and something that they can do and are successful at, and therefore it happens less. And our kids can shut down more or retreat more from social interaction. And therefore, a lot less social and language learning happens. So that said, Kendall, I just want to see if you want to add anything. Yeah.
Just for everyone to keep in mind, this slide I can guarantee, refer back to throughout the entire PowerPoint. So just this idea of following them, and that the message of I matter is going to be a reoccurring theme.
Absolutely. So thank you, Susanna, for this amazing slide. So we will definitely keep coming back to this over and over and over again. And what I would say is in the field, we've gotten a bit too focused on some of the technical aspects of the techniques that we're using to facilitate communication and language development. Those are all important, but what we sometimes overlook is exactly what's written on the top of this slide. We have to help our children become more confident communicators. Our kids at some point have to believe that they're able to do something, and they learn that by having positive, successful experiences with all of us every single time they interact with people. Make sense? Okay, so let's keep going to the next slide. A quick note about this, which we've touched on before, but it is something that in my experience over the years gets significantly overlooked. What we've done with good intentions, sometimes in the autism education and treatment world, is we have gotten our children on the spectrum to respond to us. I will give a child a word, give a child a sentence, or I will tell a child to do something, stand up, turn around, put the car on the track. All of these things that I may be doing to prompt or encourage or teach my child to communicate or teach a skill, those things oftentimes in our minds and in our data can look like we're making all of this progress and we're giving our children things they don't have. We're teaching skills. The problem with that is that initiation is actually the driving force behind all learning and development. So if our children are not actively initiating, they're not moving towards us, and they are not actually showing us and telling us what they most are interested in and then what they most want to learn, they become great responders, right? But not very good initiators. And we know from lots of years of doing this work that the kids with autism that have the best outcomes are the kids that are active initiators, right? They are able to start and sustain an interaction or a communication with people. Kids who can only communicate when we ask them or tell them to are long-term much more dependent on help and not very independent as communicators. And that's really important for all of you to understand, because your kids at this point, most of you are still young. So we really have a great opportunity to light that fire for your child of their own motivation to want to communicate with you. And we're going to focus on exactly how to do that in the next slides. Okay, Kendall?
You hit it on the nose. It's a thing that we can talk about for hours. The initiating is so important for their just long-term benefit, long-term development, their success, everything. It's the core of the communication.
Yes, indeed. So Guy, can we go to the next slide? So here we go. Already said. It's all about initiation. And I just want to say this. Why is this so hard, and why are we emphasizing this so much? And I'll say from my own experience as a professional, what happens for all of us when we're interacting with children or with people who have much greater challenges staying with us, communicating with us, is we tend to try harder to pull responses from our kids. So if we ask a question, if we try to interact, if we try to start a game, whatever it might be, and we don't get a response, what we then do is then we try harder. We get louder, we ask more, we fire more questions, we push more. And what happens is we actually have the opposite effect oftentimes on our children than we really want to, which is they move away from us, right? And they become, maybe they respond to kind of get us to get off their backs and leave them alone. But what we're not able to do sometimes is quiet ourselves and wait. Now, I've learned a lot about waiting over the years as a social interactor, as someone who's engaging and working with so many different people on the spectrum. It's still incredibly hard for me to do, even though I've seen hours and hours of video of myself interacting with kids, and I'm like, no wonder the child doesn't say anything because I never shut up. So I've learned over the years how to actually say less and wait more and observe more, and that's incredibly challenging. So it's important to recognize that there's a reason why we tend to go so quickly to push and get our kids to respond. But again, we want to emphasize that it's not long-term going to have the effect that we want it to. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we want to give you, as parents, as families, things to do that are possible and practical and sustainable in everyday life. We do not want to give you the message here today that you should be capitalizing on and taking advantage of every single interaction you have with your child. That would be completely overwhelming. You would be overly exhausted as parents, stressed out, and this is not a helpful message. What we want to try to help you do is we want to give you the message that do what you can do each day for a very small amount, or every other day, or once a week. But if you do what this slide says, and you just try doing this in whatever way is manageable for you as a parent, as a family. Some of you have multiple children, some of you have multiple children with autism, so we recognize that you have to do what makes sense for you. But here's what we would recommend and what we have seen over the years works really well. 5 minutes a day, whether it's once a day, whether it's every other day, whether it's once a week, whatever you can manage, practicing doing exactly this. Sitting with your child, not doing anything, not taking out, not putting on a big show and lights and toys and not pressuring yourself to even do anything. In fact, you can sit there with a cup of tea and observe what your child is doing. Now, most of our kids are always doing something, okay? Wait for your child to do something, look at something, say something, make a sound, whatever it is, and then follow what your child does simply by naming it. Ah, you're looking at your truck. Ah, you're pushing your ball, whatever it might be. And then pause. And that's it.
And isn't this a good message, Andrew, that really comes back to the idea that what I'm doing matters. Mommy and daddy are noticing me. I matter to them. This is such a big one that if you can in your day get those 5 minutes to be with them and sit with them, it's a very powerful message.
Absolutely, Kendall. And again, this doesn't have to be a separate, shall we say, like a separate sort of playtime or activity. For example, if it's bath time and you're giving your child a bath, you do that every night, right? You can use that time to do exactly this. Take 5 minutes of bath time. Watch what your child is doing and just name it. And that's it, right? So again, make this manageable and possible and doable for you. Try this and let us know what happens. Okay? So Kendall and I obviously have done many different versions of this with many different children, and the results are always quite powerful. Now, things may not happen instantly. I'm not saying that your child is all of a sudden going to look at you and say in a full sentence, "Thank you for paying attention to me, mommy. This is all I needed." That's likely not going to happen. But what you're doing is establishing with your child a much closer and deeper connection that your child is going to begin over perhaps some time to look more towards. And actually, your child then will begin to take you in more and actually move towards you in ways that you may not be expecting. Okay? So, give it a try.
Good luck.
Good luck. And I will say that this, in many ways, this boils down some of the essence of what a lot of years of research and practice in many different fields, including child development, including naturalistic applied behavior analysis approaches, including occupational therapy, speech therapy. So there are many approaches that where especially professionals are using these kinds of techniques. And sometimes they're trying to help parents do these things, but sometimes not. But anyway, this just to say, this slide has a lot of research kind of behind it. It's not just Andrew and Kendall thought this would be nice, even though we do. Okay. Oops, I'm clicking my screen, trying to move the slides. Trying to move the slides.
I heard it.
Yes, okay. So I've already said this. This is why we want you to do this. And it's important that you understand why. Your child has the experience. Ah, that's interesting. Mommy or daddy are listening to me. They're paying attention to me. They're with me. I'm not playing by myself, right? We know that our kids' brains are wired in such a way that sometimes being able to recognize that someone else is with me and someone else is paying attention to me can be more challenging. So we have to give our kids an even stronger opportunity to notice that and connect with us. Many of you as parents, especially if you've parented a typically developing child, you may not have to work quite as hard, right? Your child can more easily notice you and take you in. So that's why this extra support is so important for our kids that have autism. And as we said, this really gives your child, this experience gives your child extra motivation to want to then move towards you, look at you, take you in, and communicate more and interact more with you. Okay? Next slide. And this we've already said. Okay? You're giving, when your child does something, communicates something, and you give the child the message that I'm with you, and you confirm their initiative by naming it, okay? You're actually then, again, strengthening, reinforcing all of their, what may be very small or subtle efforts or attempts to communicate, okay? And so this is what's so crucial to recognize, that your child needs to get this message over and over and over again, right? And this builds over time, this builds their momentum and their motivation, okay? So part of this, I don't want to call it a training, but what practicing this is going to help you do with your child is you're definitely going to begin to tune in more closely to what can be for your child very subtle attempts to communicate and interact. Like Kendall and I over the years, I cannot tell you how many times I've seen on a video that I'm interacting with a child and I'm trying to get them to do something or say something, or I'm trying to move on to the next goal or trying to teach them something. And I will then see on a video 4 or 5 different attempts that the child made to try to send a message to me, communicate something to me, show me what they were more interested in. And I missed it because I was just in my head thinking, okay, I got to teach, we got go, right? I was moving too quickly. So this happens all the time. And our kids sometimes have very subtle, are giving us very subtle signals that they're interested in something, that they want to show us something, or that they want to do something in particular with us. So we have to pay really close attention. Sorry, Kendall, I want to pause.
You're doing everything great.
I definitely want you jump in as I'm going, please.
You're doing absolutely wonderful.
So let's see. Okay, next slide. Did we skip one?
No, this is the next one.
This is the next one. Okay, very good. So here's what we want to say, and this is very important because a lot of what we focused on seems to perhaps be for children who maybe are not yet using lots of language to communicate, okay? But here's what we want to emphasize to all of you that have children that are already verbal, who are using language, okay? What we've learned about people with autism, especially children on the spectrum, is that oftentimes children have great difficulty connecting their words and their language with what's happening right in the moment in front of them. So many of our children can get stuck in their heads, and then in terms of output, what comes out from whatever they're thinking about or focused on, what then comes out in language. Sometimes that can get very stuck on like a special interest, right? Something that they're constantly thinking about and focused on. And so sometimes our kids will talk more about those things or name those things, even though they're not actually in front of them or happening in the moment. And other times our kids can get stuck on like a memorized phrase or a memorized something that they've picked up from like perhaps a video or television or a song or whatever it might be. So sometimes our kids can be using words and using language in the moment, but they're not actually conveying what they're truly either thinking about, wanting or needing, or what's actually happening in the moment. Okay, now that can be very confusing for us because when our kids say something, of course we want to believe, yes, that's what we should talk about right now. That's what we can build on. And of course, what we're telling you is also we want you to recognize and repeat back what your child is saying. Okay, but this can be a very unique experience that some of you whose kids are talking can have, where your child will say something that's not really connected to what's happening right in front of them in the moment, okay? So let's go to the next slide. Okay, So guess what? It certainly can be helpful to repeat back to your child what you've heard them said or what they've said, right? And in some ways, this is the basic, this is not unique to autism or to children. This is something that all of us learn how to do when we're learning active listening skills, right? When Kendall says something and I confirm it or affirm it by repeating back to her what she's just said, Kendall's experience is, Andrew heard me. He's listening to me. He's interested in what I have to say, right? So sometimes then Kendall's brain can have this moment of thinking, okay, I know for sure that Andrew heard me and is interested in what I'm saying. So then now I'm going to continue or say even more or elaborate on what I just said. So this idea is not unique to any aspect of autism care or treatment or education. This is something that that we're emphasizing, however, because for our kids on the spectrum, they need this confirmation even more. Okay?
And Andrew, with that example you gave, when you are repeating what the other person says, it also builds the relationship between the two of you, and it makes your bond stronger, and you start to feel that you matter more to that person because they've taken the time to understand your message and to say it back to you. It's very powerful.
Indeed. I'm hearing like some background. I don't know if you can hear that, some background audio. If you're listening in on the webinar, can you just mute your audio so that it doesn't filter out to the rest of the participants? Thank you. Okay. Yes, Kendall. Connection builds the connection. So next slide. So here's what we want you to do in addition for your children that are using language. Think beyond simply the words that your child is saying in the moment, right? Our children are oftentimes, because again, they can have limited language, and sometimes, as we said, they can get stuck on a memorized phrase or set of words or a special interest, and say that or use that to actually be conveying something that might be different. So, for example, a child may be saying to me, you know, are you do you like blue sheep? Do you like blue sheep, Andrew? Do you like blue sheep? And they may turn to me and say that at a time when I have just asked them to do something that's really challenging for them. Or perhaps we're about to move from one activity to the next, right? Now, I may say back to them, you want to know if I like blue sheep, as a way to confirm what they've said to me. But what I also have to do is recognize that this probably doesn't have that much to do with blue sheep. What's actually happening is the child is probably asking me for more information, or they're probably trying to tell me, Andrew, I'm not sure I can do this right now, or I'm not sure that I want to leave this activity and go on to the next one, or I'm a little anxious or stressed about this right now.
Or I need some help.
Or I need some help. I don't understand, right? So this is what can be so confusing, baffling sometimes for families as well as for professionals, is I don't know what he's talking about. There's no blue sheep here. What's going on with the blue sheep, right? What we have to do is remember that our children, especially when they're more stressed, right? When they're less calm and less relaxed, they can use language to be conveying a message to us that may be asking for help, that may be asking for support, asking for assistance. And it is not necessarily literally what they're saying in my example, like about the blue sheep. And that will help you a lot as families. It's okay if you don't know exactly what your child is communicating to you, but part of your work then is to think about what might be going on for him or her right now. I see, maybe he's really stressed and needs a hug. Can we go to the next slide?
What you just said, Andrew, while we're waiting for the slide to switch, is really important, that as a parent, you will not have the answers every single time. And that's something to always remember and not to feel guilty about or bad about, because even as therapists, we don't know the answers either. And that's the time where you take the moment to pause, say less, observe, and try and figure out what is going on. And it's absolutely normal and okay to not have the answer in that moment.
Exactly. What's most important is that you're trying and that you're giving your child the message that I heard you and I'm trying to help you and I'm trying to figure it out with you. Okay. So again, here's some specific examples. Like perhaps a child starts saying, and you can go to pbskids.org. You can go to pbskids.org. You can go to pbskids.org, right? When what they're really thinking about is, I'm a little stressed right now because I don't want to get out of the car and go into the classroom or go to school, right? So what you have to do in those moments is say, ah, I see. You just need a little more time, honey. That's okay. Ah, I see. You're nervous about school today. Let's just take a minute, right? Or here, you know, I'll give me your hands. I'll give you a little squeeze or a little rub or something along those lines, right? So again, this is about recognizing that your child's language may not be capturing exactly what they need or what they're feeling. So here's some examples. I think you're really excited right now, because sometimes our kids will say a phrase over and over again when they're just overexcited. Ah, you're really excited right now. You're right, because for them, ah, it's too much. Ah, or oh, you're stressed and would like a hug. Again, just thinking about what your child really might be going through, what they really might need, and not getting too caught up in, oh, there's that silly phrase again. I have no idea what that means. Okay, I'll repeat it back to you, but right. I will say this, most of my work over the years has taught me that when parents step back and think about this, most parents, actually much better than I do, know intuitively what's going on with their child and what their child needs, because no one knows your child better than you do. So remember that sometimes your intuition, right, your thought about what might be going on with your child, when you're able to kind of give yourself room to think about it and you're not like, so stressed, you actually are in the best position to know what might really be going on for your child. So keep that in mind. As long as you can keep yourself kind of calm and think, I think this might be what's going on. Okay, and it's okay if you don't get it right, because if you get it wrong and you offer your child help or support, most of the time our kids will come back and say, no, that's not what I want. This is what I want instead, right? Kendall?
That's just a good example. Even if you get it wrong, you're still initiating that back and forth conversation and that push and pull in the conversation. And that's what the children need, is that real life example of talking about what they want and what they don't want and getting that communication with you.
Absolutely. Okay, excellent. Where are we? We're on 11. Let's go to the, I think we've already said this, right?
I think we're on slide 13 now, actually.
12, 13.
Yeah.
Yes. So here is something that we want to reiterate that we've already touched on. This is, again, we know this from actually lots of research over the years, not only about autism, but about child development. Your child's ability to communicate depends not on the amount of language that they have, but on their ability to use whatever communication they have effectively in back and forth interactions or exchanges with people, right? So I will say this as someone who's worked with lots of different kids, and certainly many kids who have aged. I've worked with many kids in early intervention programs who are now young adults on the spectrum. And what I've seen for all of them is that even the kids who developed lots of language and who were in programs where language development was emphasized, most of them did not get enough practice developing these foundational communication and social interaction skills, right? The ability to think about what they want to say and look at someone and direct their message to someone through their eyes, through their body language, through gestures, right? To look towards someone and direct a message towards someone has a lot more to do with, again, with facial expressions, with body language than it does just the words. So I've seen so many kids develop huge vocabularies, but still struggle to be able to have conversations with people, to be able to have back and forth social exchanges. So what I've learned over the years is that this is not about jamming lots of language into our kids and assuming that they'll figure the rest out later, because they won't, right? We have to show them. And we have to teach and support very gradually this process of learning how to interact in back and forth ways with people. And for most of our kids, the language learning then becomes much easier, much more natural, and then really sticks, because they actually are thinking about what they're saying, and they're thinking about who they want to say it to. They're not simply blurting out language that they have. So really want to emphasize that a lot, because it's not emphasized enough in my experience over the years. I think you see this a lot too, Kendall. Yes?
More than I would like, yes.
And it's
Absolutely.
Understandable, right? It's an understandable thing that we've done in the field. Professionals, right? We want communication development. We want language development. We assume, okay, talking is so important and so powerful. So what we do is, again, we teach language, sometimes in ways that sometimes is honestly disconnected from where our children are developmentally in terms of their social and conversational abilities. And so
Absolutely.
we jump over, we focus on the language, but we don't focus as much on all of the other foundational pieces of communication. And here's one thing to think about. 80%, and this comes from like language and communication science, 80% of everything that people communicate back and forth with one another has nothing to do with words or language, right? 80% of all of our communication that goes on every day, person to person, is nonverbal, right? So we've gotten a little bit sidetracked in our field with good intentions, and we want to try to really shift things back towards the foundations of communication. And actually, this is happening in the field, in the autism treatment world. It's actually happening with a lot of the naturalistic developmental behavioral hybrid approaches. They're really focusing now much more on development, not just on teaching words. And so this is a shift that's happening in the field. So we recognize how important it is. Okay, and I think now we're going to our final slide. Already said. Right? So we don't want our kids to be talking to us only to get what they want or need from us, right? Which happens oftentimes. Kids will just communicate with us because they've learned it to get their basic needs met, to get food, to get us to leave them alone, to get the objects or the toys that they want. That can be a nice starting point. The problem is that if they're not communicating with us because they want to tell us what they're most excited about, what they're thinking about, what they're feeling, how are they going to have friendships and social relationships? And how are they going to be able to function well in a job, right? Or in any social situation, right? Communication is not only means to end. And I will say I've worked with way too many kids who are capable of much more social communication, who have learned to only communicate again to just get their wants and needs met, and then they're gone, and then they're out, because they haven't had enough practice and enough experience with exactly what we've been describing in the webinar today. So we want our kids to share what they're most interested and excited about with us, and that's crucial for their long-term development.
To close, it sends that message of I matter.
Yes. And just to add to that, I would say that this is another thing that I'm more focused on than ever at this point in my career, that I believe very deeply, and I give my teacher mentor Maria Arts, who's a brilliant Dutch woman based in the Netherlands. I give her so much credit for helping me simplify this and think about this basic idea that every single child inside of them has a gold mine, right? Has this incredible gold mine of their thoughts, their personality, their feelings, their interests, right? What they most are interested in, who they are, what they want to share with the world. And we have to create for them the conditions in everyday life that will really affirm and confirm and sort of bring out this gold mine. I've not worked with a single person on the spectrum or a single child with autism that doesn't have an incredible gold mine inside of them. The challenge for me is learning how to be with that person or that child in a way that really affirms that. And like Kendall said, gives them the message that I'm with you, who you are is okay. And when they get that message enough over and over again from us, oftentimes then our kids start taking more risks and start building more confidence. So I think this is what I've learned more than anything over the years, that's the foundation that we need to really be starting with for all of our children, whether they have autism or not. So we would like to pause there. And now we have a bunch of questions that were sent in to us that we'd like to go over. What do you think, Kendall? Do you think we start with those questions that we were sent?
Sure, absolutely.
I'd like to do that also because I'm recognizing that some of there are people that have asked questions now, some similar questions for many weeks and maybe haven't had them addressed. So I'd like to start with one question that we have. Let me pull up my question. Sorry, was that just background? I couldn't hear.
Sorry, I was just turning my mic on.
So I'd like to start actually with the question here that was asked that I think really captures exactly what we talked about. We touched on in the webinar. I've seen this question be asked repeatedly, so I want to address it. The question is, would it be possible to give coping strategies on a child needing to ask the same question multiple times throughout the day, even though the same answer is given every time, and I've asked my child to repeat the answer back to me? Okay, so this is exactly what we were talking about earlier. This can be incredibly baffling, right? For you as a parent, is your child seems to be stuck and asking you the same question over and over and over and over again, and then you answer them or repeat the same answer over and over again, but nothing seems to change, nothing seems to move. So what I would say is, going back to what we mentioned earlier, think about not literally what your child is saying, but think beyond the words to what your child might be wanting or needing or feeling in that moment. And most of what I have seen and learned over the years is that children who get stuck and just are constantly asking the same question over and over again are actually stressed out, are trying to get some control and trying to get some attention and some help, right? And have learned that if they, in their brains, get stuck there, if I just ask mommy or daddy the same question over, at least I get a response, and at least it helps calm me down a little bit because I'm stressed or overwhelmed, and I don't have the language to pull out yet to ask really for what I want, which is, when do I get to do my favorite thing? Or, this is a little bit too much for me right now, mommy or daddy. Can you give me a minute? Or can you give me a hug? Or I'm stressed out right now. So we really want you to think, to not get so stuck with literally with the words, but think, what is my child trying to tell me right now that they may be experiencing? Yeah.
And Andrew, I have two things to add on top of that. Hopefully I can remember both thoughts. First is something I've told parents many times is, if they're not noticing what's happening in this situation, to maybe have a little book with them or in their phone, write down maybe things that are happening before or after. And then eventually when you look back at the list, you can start to see, is there a pattern that it happens every day before school? Or is there a pattern that it happens every time we drive by McDonald's? I had that happen one time with a client. And it really starts to help bring awareness if the parent doesn't have an answer to what is happening and what the child is needing. And second, see if I can remember this. Oh, yes. So even if the child does have the language, which I often get asked, my child knows how to ask for help. Why aren't they doing it in that moment? It's important that all of us, even myself, probably even Andrew, when we're feeling stressed or anxious or sad, our first thought isn't, I need help. It's not, I'm going to outreach. Our first thought is something completely different. And we need to remember that and keep that in mind when we're dealing with especially children, because just because they know how to ask for help doesn't mean in their most vulnerable moments that they're going to do it independently every time. It's so important to guide them, to be with them, and to stay with them. And I just want us all to remember that.
Beautiful, Kendall. Thank you. That's so important, and something that we miss so easily. Offer help and support, because oftentimes, and by the way, this is another thing I've learned over the years about including adults on the spectrum. And like Kendall said, it's not unique to adults that have autism. Most of us, in our moments of struggle and stress and strain, are not good at asking for help, right? If then we have a communication and social difficulty on top of that, that's going to make it even harder. So remember that oftentimes what we need to do more as parents and providers is to recognize when our kids are struggling and offer help and support, right? And in that way, our kids begin to get better at recognizing, that's right, mommy and daddy are available. That's right, I forgot, I was so stressed and I'm so used to doing this by myself that I didn't recognize that help is available. And the same is true again for professionals. How important this is to recognize the strain, the struggle, and sometimes that comes again through memorized language, memorized words, phrases. I recognize that my child needs help, and I'm going to offer support in whatever way works best for your child. Excellent. Okay, so what I'd like to do is open open it up and see if there are questions from all of you, from the parent community that you'd like to ask about your own child or children. And don't forget, when you do so, please unmute your mic so we can hear you.
Hi. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Is I think
Sorry.
we can hear. I can hear that that your mic is unmuted. Did you want to ask us a question?
I think that was, yeah, I think that was Sophie. Sophie, was your mic on?
Yeah, I put it on, but I thought somebody else was talking.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, that's Sophie.
Yeah, I guess.
Talking as well.
Can
Okay.
whoever's not Sophie just turn your mic off so we can hear Sophie?
Thank you.
My question was basically, if you use some more structured type teaching, type ABA, I'm assuming it's okay to use at that time those methods, and at other times the methods that you discuss, and kind of mix them throughout the day, and that will still help with our language development.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Because I'm in a more structured type approach at this point. I was in an ESDM approach. We're moving away from that. And I feel that she's speaking a little bit less, but I still use a bit of these other strategies outside that. And I'm hoping that will help bring back the initiation.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying, so that I'm very familiar with the Early Start Denver model approach. I think it can be very helpful, very powerful. And this is true for all therapies and all treatments. They can be incredibly powerful ways, again, to teach many different skills. The challenge with all of the treatment approaches is that they can sometimes create what I would call artificial opportunities to learn or to practice skills. And what I mean by that is if an activity that your child is doing in treatment or therapy doesn't actually have much to do with what you would be doing typically in everyday life, right? So like if your child's sitting down at a table and you're using flashcards, or you're holding up objects to have them label different things, that can look like such a great way to jumpstart language and give your child language practice. The problem is, or the limitation with that can be, that if your child isn't then using that language spontaneously in natural everyday activities with you, they're just like around the kitchen table, or it's snack time, or it's bath time, or you're out for a walk. If they're not using that language, that's not such a good thing for their long-term development. And what I've seen happen for a lot of kids is the focus becomes those treatment activities that are not so sort of natural, and then that progress doesn't stick over time, right? So what I think you're onto, which is so important, is create lots of opportunities for your son or daughter to actually use the language that they're aiming to develop in these treatment sessions. And that's really where the deeper learning is going to happen. And I would say for you know, again, from my perspective, the limitation happens when the focus is only on like the therapy, or if the therapy itself is so perhaps rigid, which I think is not necessarily true. Like the Early Start Denver model, in my experience, is more naturalistic. So people are not going to sit a child down at a table and do lots of language drills. They're going to make the language come alive in songs and in activities that are motivating and meaningful, which is great, which is actually a much more natural way of learning language. So I don't think that the problem necessarily is with the therapy itself. I think it's, are we then creating opportunities, many different opportunities beyond therapy, for the language to be practiced in ways that are typical for you as a family. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Of course. Excellent. And I'm glad you found a program. It sounds like that you know, that's using like ABA, and it sounds like in a more naturalistic kind of play-based way, which I would always really recommend, versus some more highly structured teaching programs.
Okay.
Cool. Can I ask, do you know of any like more naturalistic, like kind of learning through using your body to learn kind of thing, like embodiment, say, for example, learning to spell by, say, using pastels and then blending them in and following the handwriting and things like that, but using your body to actually complement the language learning or communication learning.
I was muted, sorry. Those
No,
are
no,
my
go for it.
those are my favorite for teaching, not only because it's different than the typical table work, but it's very engaging, it's very fun, it's very cooperative. Absolutely, there are so many different techniques. One of my favorites is using shaving cream and putting that on the table and getting our hands dirty, or putting it on the floor, getting our hands or feet dirty with spelling things or drawing things. I find that to be a lot more beneficial than just a pen and paper or a crayon and paper. You're doing so much more with your body movements, along with doing some yoga with the children. It's some of my absolute favorites for body movements.
I think it helps for memory retention as well, doesn't it? If you've used your body as well to actually have learned something.
Yeah,
Yes, it
yeah,
does.
I think you're onto something so important, which is like whole body learning, right? Like a lot of what our kids on the spectrum struggle with is they can learn something, but then not then apply it to sort of everyday situations and activities. And that's why, again, getting their whole body involved in the learning can be so powerful. And this is actually really important, because we know this is true from child development. We know that, like, if you go into a preschool, right, kids aren't sitting there just memorizing and reciting language, right? They're living it. They're singing it. They're dancing it. They're moving. They're actively playing, building things, right, manipulating stuff with their hands. So what we know from learning is this is important actually across the lifespan. And we forget this because kids then age out of their preschool programs, and then we get stuck in learning is just cognitive, is based in the head, and we have to, you know, be sitting at a desk and writing in a particular way. We've learned from a lot of people, a lot of students on the spectrum, that they need much more rigorous, sensory involved, whole body learning experiences. And then the learning goes much deeper. So absolutely, whatever works for your child, like you said, pastels. Yes, if they like pastels, absolutely write words out and sound words out and sing words out and you know, clap words out. Whatever you're doing that's engaging your child's whole body, they're going to be much more engaged and learn much more deeply. So you're really onto important stuff there.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yes. So Kendall, did we want to try to grab like one more question from?
Yes, I think let's do one more question, and then we can give it a close.
Okay, so if there's anyone, since we've heard from a couple of you already, if there's someone who hasn't yet had the opportunity to ask a question, we'd like to open it up for someone who hasn't yet asked a question to do so.
And if not, Andrew, we can also look at the list and pick one more question.
Yes.
If your child has actually got language, but they prefer to use the PEC system, how do you deal with that?
That's still communication, right?
Excellent question. Yes.
It is, but they've got the language and they know what they're talking about, but they prefer to use the PEC system. How do you help them to get off that but continue to learn language, or do you just still use both?
Excellent question. So here's what I've learned over the years about PECs and different kinds of augmentative communication systems. So the first thing to recognize is that we know that people with autism, children with autism, tend to be much stronger visual learners, right? And so what that means is that sometimes being able to use like PECs or some kind of visual system to communicate can be much easier than just spontaneously coming up with spoken language in the moment. But what I would say is it's not either or. right? So what I've learned for so many kids I'm working with is that if they're visual learners, a system like PECS can be a very powerful way. So let's say, for example, I have autism, and it's very difficult for me to come up with language spontaneously. Sometimes if I quickly hold something up, visually and show it to you or point to it or look at it, and it reminds me then of what I want to say, I want to have that tool available to me, right? Because it's going to make communication easier. So visuals can not only help jumpstart language and help kids access the language that they might have in the moment, but also it can be used to convey a message to someone just by holding something up or using a card. And some of our kids are taught to use PECS, and it sounds like your son has been taught in that way. So he's going to it not only because maybe visually it helps him, but also because he's learned that it's a way that he can get his message across to people more effectively. So we definitely want to support that, right? Support his use of whatever system he's using that makes communication easier for him. But that doesn't mean that we can't also, then when he shows us a picture or gives us something, we also want to say it and repeat it and help him hear it and process it, right? There are many kids on the spectrum who actually were nonverbal for many years and actually don't start using language effectively until their teenage years, for example. So remember that language learning is very complex. And so what's most important is that we're giving your son the message that the visual communication is helpful, is powerful, that all of his communication is important, and we're going to support it and confirm it and reinforce it, and then we can also augment it or enhance it by giving him sometimes words and modeling for him language that's harder for him to come up with on his own.
And you know what else comes to mind, Andrew, is that slide we spoke about for the message behind what they're saying. And it could be that if he has verbal speech, but he's choosing to use pictures, it could be that speech alone is an anxious thing, or it provides a lot of stress on him. And it's a lot easier for this child to use visuals, and maybe they feel more comfortable with that. And so I would definitely also recommend taking a moment and seeking, is that maybe something this child is dealing with, and how can we help them, and what do they need in the moment right then and there?
Make sense?
Yeah.
The only other thing I would add to that is that sometimes our kids will, and this is something that I see happen in schools all the time. And of course, our schools are always have the best of intentions in terms of supporting and teaching communication skills. But sometimes staff in schools can somehow in their training learn that if a child is starting to communicate spontaneously with their eyes, with a gesture, by reaching, whatever it might be, and a sound or a single word, sometimes the staff will say, show me with your PECS, show me with your book. And so sometimes then kids get the message that, I see, even though I'm trying to communicate in ways that are not focused on a visual system, I'm getting the message that I should stop that and just use the PECS. And unfortunately, that happens too much. So some kids can get the message that they're going to go to the PECS because that's what they've been trained to do, and then the other aspects, the other skills that they're showing us that they have, it might be a word or a sound or a gesture, don't get reinforced and don't get confirmed, and so they start to do those things less. So I've definitely seen that happen where kids can get maybe overly or exclusively focused on PECS because that's how they've been trained. That doesn't mean that we want to ditch the PECS and let it go, because it's like a crutch. It's like an important tool for our kids. But we then want to sort of build on it and expand it and give our kids the message that, I see. Other ways that you're communicating, I also see and I also hear. and are
Isn't it
really
like, sorry, now, isn't it like someone being multilingual? If they've got both systems of communication, if suddenly they can't think of that word in English, for example, they'll think of it, they could use it in text or in French or a different language. So it's just basically being, giving them more options, I suppose.
That's exactly right. And that's why what we keep emphasizing is communication, not simply language. We want our kids to be able to send our message to people in many different ways. If they only have one way, they're going to be much more limited, right? And so again, we want our kids to be good communication problem solvers. And if they try to communicate with us in one way, by looking at us or making a sound or using some words, and they don't get their message across, I want them to then be able to rush and grab a textbook or grab something and say, you know, mommy, daddy, here's what I'm trying to tell you, right? Because that's how all of us become stronger, more confident communicators, is when we have lots of different ways to get our message across. If we only have one way, we're going to be much more frustrated, right? And so that's the message I think that's really important. Is think about it more as broader communication, not only one mode of communication. Yeah. Okay, I think I'm looking at the clock here, and of course I'm early in my day here in the USA. You guys are later into your days, so I think that that we will pause, or we will stop for today. I will say thank you so much to all of you for your wonderful questions that you both sent in, and also that you were brave enough to come on the air and ask. So thank you, and hopefully, yes, Kendall is.
And yes, sorry, just a few follow-up items for everybody before you give the close, Andrew. A reminder that on December 11th is our next webinar, and that is going to be on supporting your child's social development. The opening up for registering will be soon. I believe it's not yet, but it will be soon. And there's always an option to go to our webinars page on the transformingautism.org and submit any feedback or any comments, questions about the webinars. And as you might be aware, after the webinars, you will receive a small email with a quick survey if you want to just fill out a couple information or feedback points for us. It's amazing because these webinars are tailored towards what you as parents want. And yeah, our website has loads of information, wonderful articles, wonderful videos. Take a look if you haven't already. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Kendall. Thanks to all of you again as families for joining us, and we're cheering for you. We're behind you. So keep doing the very best you can, and remember, your kids all have a gold mine inside, and we can bring that out.